I am Jay Naklis from Coleman Insights, and joining me from Pantheon Media today are Peter and Christian. Guys, thanks so much for joining us for this discussion. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having us, Jay.
Pleasure to be here, Jay.
So Pantheon is a network with music and sports podcasts, including the official Metallica. The Mighty Metallica is on your roster, and we met in March, I think, at the Podcast Movement Evolutions Conference, and we have this shared love of we're all music geeks and have this shared love of music. We love music podcasts, and it's I guess. It's kind of spun into several conversations about the topic of using music and podcasts, which has always been fascinating to me. And I think it's a topic that maybe hasn't been talked about enough. And there's a lot of, you think of things that have misunderstandings, misinterpretations. This has got to be like right towards the top of the list, right?
True. Well, I think it all starts with, the working with an industry where there is a bit of a Gordian knot when it comes to licensing, and maybe that needs a refresher into the 21st century on what that could mean and how the economics work when spread, by these smaller creators, that there is a lot of upside to them if they would pay attention.
So let me break that down into the layman's terms. So those of you who don't know what a Gordian knot is,
what
I think we got to start with Greek history. Well, come on, everybody should know that. It's classically trained.
Putting it in the terms of some of the different types of music licenses that podcasters would actually need today to actually use a track, you would first need. It's two different sets of licensing and buckets this falls under. The first set are the master recording rights, and that's the actual recorded version of the song that actually is usually owned by the label, right? And then you have the composition rights, which are the melody, the lyrics, and those are typically owned by
songwriters,
the publisher, right?
Okay.
But then, so here's where the problem becomes for podcasters, and it gets really hairy, and hence the Gordian knot. You don't just deal with these PROs like radio or performance rights, because podcasts are actually considered on demand and downloadable because of the RSS feed and the technology that podcasting originally stemmed out of, that doesn't today still define podcasting, but is a major infrastructure behind how podcasts are served and delivered to you via Apple, Amazon, Spotify, etc. So you have these other set of rights. You need reproduction rights to copy this music into your show, right? Then you have to have distribution rights to get it out to all the listeners from your RSS feed, wherever it's being stored and served to everyone listening. And lastly, you have something called digital transmission rights, right? And those are for streaming purposes. So now you're looking at 6 different parties to just use 30 seconds when all you want to do is try to promote and sell and push music discovery at heart in that 30 seconds of music.
Yeah. We understand why, you can't just make a podcast and start playing songs. That's not the point. And that's not what we do. We kind of consider ourselves like the modern version of Rolling Stone magazine. We're audio and video, but the thing is that we need to talk about the music by showing the example. Now we try to keep the samples short and in context, which does fall under fair use. So we are covered, but we would love to figure out a scheme that allows full licensing to be used so that more people would engage in this activity and provide more marketing opportunities for those rights holders as an end result.
Yeah, so let's talk about fair use for a second, and what exactly that means based on. So it sounds like there's a journalistic component to it, right? When you mention Rolling Stone as an example, so is the difference that if I'm covering it in that way compared to, I don't know, just playing it as part of the best of the 2000s playlist that I put together, is that the difference?
Well, I'm going to start on this one just because I would consider myself an expert in this, because we've been doing this for 10 years, and about a year ago, Warner Brothers and Universal en masse decided to flip on a switch in Spotify that basically gave us, I believe, over 1 week, we received 4,700 individual notices that basically took us through a 3-page multi-tier process that fair use was one of the main cruxes of it. And so I'll tell you a little bit about that, and that experience is this. Fair use it's a legal doctrine that is used in defense. It's not a right. You can't claim it on the front of things. And it's defined when you use copyrighted material for things like criticism, comment,
Parody.
news reporting, parody, teaching, research, pastiche. There's a lot of different things that it covers when you use some of copyrighted material. But then the 4 factors, if it were ever to come to a court case where you did go to trial, and during the trial, your lawyer claims for fair use, the judge and the jury, if there was a jury, which most likely there would never be, but the judge would look at 4 main factors around what is considered fair use. Now, number 1, it's the purpose of the use, right? The nature of the works, the amount of it used, and the effect on the market for the original. Did it damage it? Did it lift it up? What did it do to it? Did it take money away from it? How did it impact the market when this happened, right? So if you're using, a clip like we do for review or critique or demonstration, that is covered under fair use. Should it get to that point of when
if it ever got to that point.
and we are very confident in that. But if we simply take 30 seconds of our favorite song and use it as background music, use it as entertainment purposes, just an intro on something that doesn't apply, that almost would never qualify.
Right. Don't use Kenny Rogers the Gambler for a gambling podcast.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
So at the end result, basically, what you'll get from an attorney is never do it because it's expensive to defend should it get to this point, right? Not all of them have the network, the ways and means, and the experience and wisdom that we do, having as many podcasts as we do and understanding the differences and what we're doing, right? A lot of podcasters are just not worth the risk to an individual podcaster at the end of the day.
Okay, so now I'm curious about how hosting platforms play a role in this, and I guess to explain to everyone what that is. If I'm an independent podcaster and I want to get my podcast out to the world onto all the different platforms, Apple and Spotify, etc. Like you mentioned before, there's an RSS feed, and that's when you go to a podcast hosting platform. Some examples are like Buzzsprout and Libsyn and Blueberry.
Yep.
They will take that and they will put your show
Distribute
notes
it
in
out.
there, right? You upload your episode and it goes out to the world.
Yeah.
So do they have any sort of role in this or no?
I'll take a first shot, then
Yeah,
I'll let
go
Christian
ahead.
talk. So this one's interesting because
They know
right
about
now-
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and right now, none of these hosting platforms. So what you're talking about, Jay, is where when I make a podcast, I make an audio file, I have to put it up somewhere so that it can be distributed and heard everywhere. Now, originally, none of those places in the podcasting industry for the first 15 years were also places that also had blanket music licenses. So we have a world now where you have some of these hosting services
Like Spotify.
that do have a comprehensive blanket license for their platform. So like
Apple.
a Spotify for podcasters or an Anchor or literally Amazon Music, right? So when they make their originals, they don't have to negotiate in the same way that the independent podcaster does. But these host services at the end of their day are just, what we would say are CYA, which is cover your ass. And it's about liability, right? So if you have 1 second of any copyrighted music on a show on one of your hosts, like a Libsyn or a Blueberry or anywhere else, and they are contacted by the rights holder to ask that it gets taken down, they are liable. So ultimately, your host is who is responsible for the distribution of copyrighted material. And none of them want to take on the liability on behalf of thousands of individual creators who they don't know their intentions.
Right.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So none of those companies are willing to, be the law enforcement of usage out there. We've presented some concepts that we might be willing to, take that role on, or basically somebody would have to take that role on if it was strictly a downstream, hoover up the nickels, make sure that they're using it properly, and provide reporting and monthly checks to the rights holders.
And
Well, go ahead, Peter.
and what Christian's talking about was deployed in the best way. The best example we have of what Christian is talking about is Content ID on YouTube.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about, the world's top premier kind of copyright material filtering platform right now that notifies rights holders in near real time about their usage via a creator or influencer. And nowadays, especially, we're in this weird world where videos are podcasting, live streamers are podcasters.
Right.
Spotify's got video for podcasters. And the more that they are using music and being flagged, but they are given the opportunity because of the ubiquitous nature of where all video is being kind of served through, and
Just on YouTube.
just to YouTube. We, obviously we talk about the hosting platforms in 60, 70 different places your podcast can be found as an audio format. Well, there's only one or two right now that you're going to find them in video, and they really can control that, and they have a great system there. So they do allow the usage of copyrighted works on YouTube. You can either share in the data, you can share in the monies, you can be blocked in certain countries, or you can go through a multi-page process of claiming fair use, by which many of the large folks who have the 5, 8, 10 million listeners on YouTube that are doing music reviews and critiques. Rick Beato, a couple other ones that we know, are dealing with this issue right now, where they're getting copyright strikes where they used to just be able to claim fair use.
It seems like YouTube is gotten a little more militant on the usage, certainly with certain artists. But at the same time, you've seen, just like when digital music began with Napster, there was this Heisman of no, we're not going to do this, and eventually everybody went along with the program. And so it's just a question of how long do you have to put up with that before everybody sees the long-term benefits. And, this has happened in the recording industry time and time again. They always fear the technology. And when they finally employ that technology, they end up making more money than they ever did before.
Right. So when you think about the way that labels look at this, is a lot of it from being antiquated, like an antiquated view of it? I think you said, Peter,
I did use the term Gordian knot.
Yeah,
yes, you did. Yes.
The labels, listen, at the end of the day, there's only one thing the labels care about, which is money.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you go back to it, what is their answer is this, is if there was a there, they would have a system in place. And what do we mean by that? If you look at the company Pex.com, which became Rights.com, and some of the data indexing they did in their studies of
trying to copy YouTube's content.
Yeah, they analyzed they analyzed a massive amount of YouTube, and they indexed actually every podcast out of 200.5 million of them. They ran through a filter, and they identified music usage in both YouTube and in audio podcasting. What they found was, in YouTube, you had about 83% of videos were using music of some form or another, copyrighted, license, etc. And then in audio podcasting, they found that only 17% were using music. And this was, probably about 5 years ago. That's probably adjusted a few points upward. But, at the end of the day, there's an opportunity there, okay, to use more music and grow. But conversely, if we look at the top 200 podcasts, that are, taking all the dollars and ad dollars and taking all the listeners, right?
They're
How
not
many of
exactly
them are using music or went out and
podcasts,
paid
right?
sync rights to use a track or use it? None of them are. So you have the
Right.
music labels going, look at all the top podcasts. None of them are music. None of them are using music. There's no money in us licensing any of these top people so that's where we came in years ago with an idea that we called AMP, which was the Alliance of Music Podcasters in our early days, where one of the solutions we thought, and we still believe, was if we could aggregate our entire vertical of not just Pantheon and our 100+ music podcasts, but then some of the other music podcasters and networks out there, that we could create a set of data and create a blanket license that we could then go to the labels and get. But the issue still becomes at the host level, and the data and tracking and getting these hosts companies to have some skin in the game at why financially should they get in the business of tracking these data and stats on their end for these labels. Right? Spotify did it because they went and negotiated and got Sound Exchange, and they could come all the force to bear with their subscription product. But what is in Libsyn and Blueberry and Artnet? What is in their interest for the labels to go, hey, every month, here's all the data and all the music usage that was happened on the platforms, right? And so that's where we're at. There's got to be money there for somebody, and the labels don't think there's money there, a lot of money right now.
That's really, it's interesting what you say about the top podcasts and them not using music and that argument, right? Because a lot of it comes from, like, when we do research, we did the State of Video Podcasting study back in March that we presented at that conference we were talking about. And it's very typical when you do these types of industry studies and you're just researching the podcast consumer and you're asking them about category fandom, not actual usage, but you ask them what categories are they most into. Music is always high. I mean, the last one that we did, it was number 7 overall. That's really, really big. And so there is a gap between people's perception of, hey, I love this, I want this type of podcast, and their actual consumption. But it comes from what you're talking about. It's because there's not enough popular music. I was recently reading about Song Exploder, which is a really big podcast, right? Where artists come on and they dissect a song and how was it made? They get in the weeds. It's great. And the creator was talking about how, I don't remember if it came off for a while, but the whole point was, at one point he just couldn't afford all of the fees. And I guess it became big enough that they were able to do it. But but that's the quandary, right? It's not that the popularity isn't there. It's not that you wouldn't have better performing music podcasts if more were able to be used, right? So
there should be. We have been told time and time again that in the music industry, we are the marketing arm nowadays. The old ways of trying to get people to pay attention to new music was through the FM DJ, the record store clerk, and the music press. None of those exist anymore. So we are the 21st century version of all those things wrapped up into a single platform. And we think that the music industry should lean into us and, duplicate more of us by allowing a licensing scheme that would be conducive to that sort of growth.
Yeah, I think the condemnation of FM radio as the lack of source of music discovery was a little too much on the one side, but your point is well taken. It's a lot less than it was, for sure, and people are going to streaming for music discovery in droves, and it should be a conduit for that. That's not happening.
Yeah, you also have, a much larger pool of music to choose from out there. So, how do you find what is the next thing that you want to hear? We know that algorithms and playlists aren't exactly the best way to do that. Music is a very, very personal experience. And so, word of mouth is actually the best way that most people have discovered new music. So the algorithm will feed you, your commonalities, as we like to say, if you're a fan of Black Sabbath, well, geez, they think you're going to be a fan of Ozzy Osbourne. Well, yeah, no kidding. But that's not how people actually consume music. They want to explore. They want to put their fingers out into other potential possibilities, whether they like it or not. And if you had, a system to help recommend those sort of things, that would be better for everybody.
I think a couple analogies would be, thinking about, even like host read ads, for example, are always more effective than
Then the
right.
dynamic insertions. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Why? Because it's someone you trust telling you something. It's a recommendation. It's more personal than an algorithm, right?
Yep.
And I think and same thing, like the way people discover new podcasts for years. In fact, up until this year, the number one was always friends and family. Now social media is number one. Friends and family is still up there, but ultimately it's to your point, it's word of mouth. And so we've talked about, when it comes to a solution and how do we convince the labels, how do we get them to a point where we can get to the system you're talking about, where every independent podcaster could have the opportunity to use popular music? How do we convince them? What do we do here?
We dangle a big dollar in front of them. That's how we do it. That's what they want, definitely.
Yeah. They have to understand that it's definitely marketing, music discovery, and the back catalog exposure is where it's really important. How do you, if you have a friend or you get a recommendation from somebody for a restaurant, do you trust them if they haven't eaten there? I mean, let's talk. I heard about this song on this podcast. They talked
but
about
I can't
it.
really talk about it.
You should go check this band out because they just talked about the song. Oh, really? That's how you're going to recommend or refer something because a friend, read the review of the restaurant. You should go there. Well, did you eat there? Like, I wouldn't trust anybody who recommended a band to me if they didn't hear the band or the song.
Yeah, that makes no sense at all. So, to talk again in context, we're not suggesting that they just like willy-nilly let people use music to their heart's desire. We're suggesting to put, some rules around it, and that is basically the fair use rules. Parody, commentary, education. Those are things that I think benefit from small samples of a music to express what it is that you're talking about, so that the concepts and ideas get fully realized to the audience.
Now, let's just say that we are allowed to do that, though. Actually, those 4,500 notices we went through the 3-phase step, declared fair use. When you come through Spotify, they gave you a notice. There was 4 things. You can say, this is not in my work. We have rights to use it from the rights holder. We're using it under fair use, or we will remove it. You have to check 4 actions, and then they check back, and then they take it down if you haven't responded. And you get I think it's 72 hours, 3 days to respond to these notices. If you don't, they take your podcast down off Spotify. So we did 4,500, and all of them, we did fair use on all of them. Every one of those episodes is still up on Spotify. So if we were to go in front of a court today or a lawyer, I'd go, I have 4,500 cases of it being accepted as fair use and being played on Spotify after we submitted. But that's the problem. They would still go after and shut your account down, and you kind of never get to that point. So we're not, we advocate poking the bear a little bit if you claim fair use. And no one has ever been sued in the history of the internet for using a piece of music in a creative social work, ever. Yeah. You can never find. As a matter of fact, only one person was ever sued or attempted to be sued in the Napster years for uploading and sharing a music file at all. Because all the liability, it's all cover your ass. It's a whack-a-mole game, Jay. If Podbean gets a notice from Universal because somebody's putting up their entire Beatles catalog as podcasts, right? And people can do that. Anybody can do that today. You can go.
We don't recommend that.
You can go make a podcast and put up your entire music catalog, right? And see what happens, okay?
Definitely don't recommend that.
Right. But the technology exists that it can be tracked. The rights holder can get notice in real time. You can get the data in real time if everybody has listened to it, and you can share in the monetization of it. So if YouTube can do it with Content ID, the question becomes, why can't the rest of them do it? So, right. And they can, especially in today's AI filtering world, they can. Mm-hmm. Do they want to? Is there money in it for them? Right. That's now the next thing.
That's what it comes
Google
down
has
to.
AdWords. So it's in their best interest to make a song like let's take one for example. The African American kids were listening to Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's a reaction video, right? Before that, they let that go because that song blew up and made more copies and sold more streams and listens in the next 2 weeks than ever. So at least that they understood in the moment they could go from 0 to 100 million overnight of views because they let it go as the rights holders. They could have said no and squashed that in the first 1 minute when they got the notification, right? But because there was a system in place to let them share the data, the money, and everything, and Google wanted to make money on it too, right? So and then that's I'll end it with this. The dirty secret is that Spotify has millions of uses of full songs in their music category under their podcasting, and none of it is being paid back to the rights holders right now. But Spotify is running ads on those podcasts and making money on all the ads, on all the music, on all those podcasts. Spotify is making money, right? But on the other side of the house, on the same platform, they have Sound Exchange paying out for a stream from that song. So you ask yourself, they can track it, and they do on their platform. Why not just track the usage on the podcast and pay the rights holder via Sound Exchange? Because then they'd have to start to reveal the ad dollars and what they're monetizing on the podcasting side of the house to the music people. Do you think they want to do that?
Right. Right. So you think it obviously comes down to money. So is it going to be if they see that, allowing this in podcasts is going to result in more concert tickets sold, more streams of their artists, more merchandise sold, et cetera? Is that, do you think ultimately that's what's going to flip the switch for them?
I think in the end, they're going to come to embrace just the fact that there is something out there that is, marketing their wares in a manner that they're familiar with. So I think that will happen. We would like to just see more folks getting this game, and we think that a lot of people are holding back because they're afraid of that. For years we were always like, you guys, you can't do that, we can, and we were like, no, we think we can, and we got some legal advice early on that we were standing on some fair use ground, and as long as we maintained that, education commentary primarily, we do some parody but not a lot, we'd be in a good spot, and the evidence has bared out. We have not been shut down, we have not been sued, we haven't lost a single episode.
And what I would say is that research is absolutely critical and something we are trying to be more heavily invested in here with our creators, what's the music usage in our shows. And we need data on a lot of these usage patterns, right? So how much music do these podcasters want to use, for how long? And we want to help try to build these licensing models and be transparent with the industry. So with that, though, we need audience research, right, to demonstrate the value proposition to these rights holders.
Yeah.
So we can show things like, a podcast listener that's 40% more likely to be a music super fan and maybe 70% more likely to attend a concert. And then that changes what you're saying, and what we're talking about, which is the conversation from how do we protect this content to, how do we reach these valuable fans with this content, right? So we can flip it on them a little bit. And then with that research, I hope we get to, then some economic modeling, right? So understanding what can these podcasters afford to pay, what rights holders, want and need to make this work for everyone, because we're not radio stations. There's a lot of individuals.
Well, micro radio stations.
Right. So it's not being licensed at one big scale. So,
right.
We believe, again, that it's a problem that has an opportunity to be solved that can benefit the whole ecosystem.
Because do you envision when this all shakes out, like, how do you envision this for, like, what's the perfect scenario for the podcaster? Is it something that it feels like it's hard not to be complicated, right? Because there's so many different levels of whether or not I've got a big audience or a small audience, how many songs am I using, how much of the song am I using, right? So how does this look at
Well,
the
the
end to you
mechanics,
guys?
are one thing of figuring out like 30 seconds, 10 seconds. I mean, we've looked at, maybe microcharging of like, hey, if you use 10 seconds, there's X. If you use 20 seconds, it's Y. If you use 30 seconds, it's Z. We've looked at that sort of concept. But and then the size of audience, I think, is critical. I mean, if you've got 100 people, they can't be charging you $10,000 for a sync
Right.
license. It's like it needs to be commensurate to the size of the audience, I think, more than anything else. So it's a scale. If you got 100,000 people listening to your thing and are all getting excited, well, then you should pay more to use the license, the music, than somebody who's got 100 people.
So, but the implementation is actually much easier than we all think, and it's actually not as complicated, Jay, because all the hosting platforms, almost all of them, they charge a fee. You give them your credit card to upload your file, right?
Right.
So
you pay a monthly fee usually.
You pay a
right?
monthly fee. Okay, so now when I go on to, let's just use Libsyn as an example, because I love you, Libsyn. When you upload a show to Libsyn, you check out. To be a podcast, is this statement not true, or is this true or false? You must be in a category to be distributed as a podcast in an
That's
RSS
true.
Right.
feed. Correct, right?
Mhm.
So we have this qualifier that you now have to check you're in the music category. Only the people who check. There's only 4 available music categories. There's music, music interviews, music history, and music commentary. Those are the only 4 available that you can flag yourself as in the podcasting ecosystem. If you're within those, your RSS feed gets run through the AI music filter. And then through the AI music filter on Libsyn, I get dinged 0.0005 cents, whatever the streaming rate is or the play rate is for a song. If I have 100 plays of it, if I have 10,000 plays or 1 million plays, my credit card on file gets billed for that. And I click OK. I would like to opt in to my show being tracked in the music category and pay for the usage of music rights, right? And then that RSS feed goes back to the rights publisher owner. They can listen to the podcast just like they do on YouTube. And in real time, their army of 5,000 people in Germany working 24/7, checking rights on YouTube to clear them all the time, can do the same thing for the other platforms, right? It's not that hard. It's why would Libsyn take the time to implement this tech on their side if 10
Well,
people are going to
there's
use
got to
it,
be
they're gonna
money
pay
for them.
$20 a month.
Right. Right. Well, the one fly in that ointment that I'm asking you about, though, because that makes total sense to me logistically, but except for the fact that you're not going to just use music ideally in music podcasts. You might have a sports podcast, or
but it
a
has
comedy
to start
podcast.
somewhere. Let's start there. Okay. You are
Okay.
correct, but we have to
Right.
build the use case and create some guardrails first for the rights holders to go, yes,
Right.
these are people who are legitimate in the music industry to push music. They're verified. We know they're in that category. We can throw them out of that category if they're abusing our music. We can contact Apple or whatever it is. We can contact Libsyn and go, no, they're not really in the, they're using this song for entertainment purpose, whatever it is. I was just starting at the beginning. Yes, you're correct. At scale outside of the music category, but we need to start with something that's going to work. Right.
All right, Jay.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.